Chances are that if you grew up during the early 2000s, you might have heard of the seemingly growing Korean MMO known as Maplestory. For those that don't, allow me to give you a quick summary. Developed by Nexon, it's a free-to-play 2D side-scrolling mmorpg where the only real goal is to go around the world and kill monsters. A crude enough summary, but it should give you a basic idea. The concept was arguably pretty novel for the time. Most MMOs were 3D like World of Warcraft and Guild Wars. Its popularity had soared to the point where it was even featured on Fox News. Crazy to think, isn't it? Nowadays, I wouldn't blame the average viewer if he had no idea what this game even was, especially the fact that it's still running to this very day. But we can talk about that later. I'm sure the question is running through your minds. What made it so popular? Well, the first and most important thing to understand is that the barrier to entry was cheap. It's easy to think about modern gaming and how most players have decent computers with fast enough internet, but during the height of its popularity, gaming PCs weren't exactly common. Most people just owned the bare necessities for computer or, more likely, played games on console. Even when you consider WoW's popularity, that game wasn't hardware intensive either, but Maplestory took that a step further. Nearly any computer around the time could run the game with little to no problems, and that just allowed the average household to get into the game. The second most important factor was that it was free to play. There were no subscription fees attached. Just create an account and download the game. A large majority of the game's players were students after all, and being in school meant they had tons of free time after school. Well, for the most part. I can still recall how many of my friends played the game, and that was in elementary school. It wasn't just Maplestory, of course. This was a time where the most popular games were free to play, such as RuneScape and Adventure Quest. Technology nowadays has progressed to the point where we could play Wuthering Waves on a mobile device. The concept of mobile games has been relegated to Minesweeper back in those times. If you weren't console gaming, you were probably gaming on the family computer. So you can see how the game rose to dominance as it did. Which brings ourselves right over to the next point, the gameplay. The core of Maplestory's gameplay is creating a character, selecting a class, and exploring Maple World. It was much more juvenile than what we have now, but arguably there was a degree of freedom to the customization of your character. Stats were randomly generated through a dice system, and you could roll for as many times as you want. Often you want your primary stat to be the highest number, with your dump stats as the lowest. A similar system would be D&D's dice stat system, where you could also roll dice to determine your stats. Believe me, we could spend hours attempting to min-max the perfect stats and still not get it, and yet we persisted. It's not like we had anything else to do. Anyways, the game has several actions you could do. Typical of the genre, you are free to map your hotkeys to any key you wanted. First, you go through the game's tutorial, Maple Island, then you reach Victoria Island. Once you attain your class, the world is essentially your oyster. Nothing was stopping you from accidentally wandering into high-level areas. That was one of the things I looked fondly upon during those days. I often wanted to see what the game had in store for me, so I traveled wherever I could. If I saw something that looked dangerous, it most definitely was. And dying had the cruel penalty of erasing a bit of experience. Since the maps were all in 2D, it didn't feel as wide open as normal 3D MMOs. With everything so self-contained, the world usually had tons of road splits and hidden dungeons. It really did feel like you were an adventurer. The classes, though at its most simple, were still distinct enough from one another. They each had their own feel and you were bound to have a favorite. Some even had mobility, which the others lacked. Others didn't have to worry about missing. Yes, accuracy was very much a core mechanic. If you didn't have dex, your accuracy with your attacks was worse fuck all. Unless you were a magician, but I digress. As you can see, players were allowed to experiment. A warrior could easily go the famous dexless variety, which sacrifices accuracy for power, but that usually required some budgeting, which most new players wouldn't be able to do, so allocating a bit of dex goes a long way. Even your weapon had consideration. One-handed were much faster and more accurate, but two-handed were much more powerful, albeit slower. It's so simple compared to what we have today, but simplicity is often key to a fun game. Oh, but I'm not done just yet, because I have to talk about one of the most important mechanics in this game, something that old-time veterans are aware of. I am referring to, of course, scrolls. These were rare drops, sometimes incredibly so, that had the percentage chance to increase the stats of your weapon. See, each weapon has a number of slots dedicated to scroll buffs. When using a scroll, you have a chance to succeed and gain bonus weapon stats, or it just blows up in your face. Additional stats were often key for players to easily progress. It even allowed for the aforementioned Deckless Warrior. Why split stat points when you could just gain free extra stats from your Sauna Robe? But these were rare, so it's not like everyone could just get them. Were you punished for RNG? No, and this ties into the next most critical point, the economy. MMOs usually are able to thrive for two core reasons. player count, and the second-hand market. See, much like TCGs, the best and easiest way to get something is to buy it directly from another vendor, in this case, another player. The most popular location at all times was the free market. Here, players spam trade request messages like it was their job. This was also how you made much of your income in this game. Eventually, you'll start earning items that are worth something, so it all worked out. Real ones remember going on Channel 1. Later on, the game also created a helper which would allow you to manage a store which sold your items while you were away. Couldn't find what you needed on the given day? Just head online to a community forum and see if you have any takers. The community was large but interconnected, and this sense of community was, and still is, the most critical to the game's success. One of Maplestory's most popular features is the Party Quest, a special series of dungeons where you had to team up with other players to complete. These often gave you plenty of experience and, at times, rare items, though it was heavily incentivized to go for these whenever you could, which in turn meant that players were always spamming the chat to look for one. Once more, shoutouts to Channel 1. The dungeons usually weren't simple either. They usually involved plenty of puzzle solving with a boss to defeat at the end, though communication ended up being very important if you want to succeed. Through all of that, friendships were made, some maybe even lasting lifetimes. And sure, that sort of thing isn't new in gaming, but this was during a time where we didn't have apps like Discord to always keep us interconnected. These games were all we had to maintain some of those friendships. There were even times where people just clowned around, not even actually playing the game. Just hanging out with your friends was more than enough for people. It's one of the largest things people miss about the game today. Yes, today. The game has certainly changed quite a bit over the past 20 years. While it's massively popular in South Korea, the global release has yet to really recover from its fall. So, what happened? There's a lot of factors, and I had to research quite a bit just to formulate my own understanding. Let's start with arguably the most egregious reason: the hacking. If you know Nexon at all, and I mean just the bare minimum, then you know that their clients are shit, and I mean absolute dog water. This resulted in hackers flooding the market with scrolls and perfectly enchanted items. As I mentioned earlier, a good economy can help keep an MMO afloat due to the reliance on good gear. So what happens when you stuff the market with valuable items? Deflation, which is the decrease in overall prices in the economy. While this sounds like a good thing, do keep in mind that players need trading to earn mesos, the in-game currency. And it's not like people were actually going to use hacks themselves, that's just integrity speaking. Another important reasoning was the game's content updates. At the end of the day, Maplestory is an intense grind game. There may be party quests and all, but a majority of your time will be spent grinding the end game. Classic Maplestory is infamous for its horrid experience curve. Players could take months of grinding just to reach the endgame. Things were awfully stagnant, and even the addition of new classes didn't help matters. By the time the Big Bang update rolled around to solve the XP curve, the damage had already been done. Even then, the game was already becoming much more pay to win. The idea that you needed to pay real money in order to easily progress through the game. You can blame Nexon for creating the ideas of modern pay to win, from loot boxes to gacha mechanics. One might think I'm joking, but I'm not. They are one of the largest reasons for modern gaming going this route. Originally, the cash shop was just filled with cosmetics to spice up your character. However, they started adding in items such as teleport rocks and free market assistance. Even pets had things like item magnets and auto potions to make your grind easier. It's true that other games at the time required you to pay, but that was mainly for subscriptions and cosmetics. Maplestory was one of the first of its time to really adopt the pay-to-win methodology. Even now, they're still infamous for their practice in their own game, to the point where South Korean players bought protest trucks when they found out that a core mechanic, the potential system, was rigged. You don't mess with my people, they're ridiculous at protesting. Nexon is absolutely a shitty company and is a major contributor to the West's decline in popularity. Speaking of the West, it's vital to understand that Nexon of America and Nexon of Korea often do slightly different things with their updates. While the patches remain the same, Nexon of America is actually free to alter various contents and mechanics however they like. For example, the game has attack speed along with certain passives and buffs to increase that attack speed. While global Maplestory has no cap on attack speed increase, Korean Maplestory does. So why is this important? Marriage. The concept of marrying a player in this game originated from global Maplestory in the town of Amoria. Now, game marriage is often just a wholesome cosmetic for two players. In Maplestory, it's the key to getting one of the best buffing consumables in the entire game. This is the Onyx Apple, a consumable that grants the following stats: weapon attack plus 100, magic attack plus 100, and defense plus 20 for 10 minutes. No other item in the game, not even party buffs, granted the insane amount of power that these apples did. For comparison, a max level blast, the second job of a cleric, grants plus 15 to weapon and magic attack for 300 seconds, which is about 5 minutes. The weapon and magic defense are different from base defense listed on the apple. As you can no doubt see, the difference from 15 to 100 is absolutely mind-boggling, and most party buffs were usually 2nd or 4th jobs to begin with. Not to say this was the big reason for its decline, but I want you all to take notice of the power creep that took hold. Even with this item, the meta was extremely stagnant, with Night Lords being the objectively best class. Still, I figured it was necessary to talk about it in order to help you understand the state of the game. At its peak, classic Maplestory's endgame was once you reach level 120, aka 4th job. Bossing was now added to the list of things you can and should be doing. While there are considerably less things to do back then than today, the barrier to entry was still there. Certainly didn't help things when parties absolutely required the presence of a bishop, a support-oriented magician class. Their party-wide buffs, healing, exclusive map-wide attack, and XP increase led to something known as leeching. In a party, when only one person kills monsters, then they get 60% of the XP and the other leeching gains 40%. So with this method, a fresh character could shoot up in levels by training on higher level monsters. This one class was so important that it created an imbalance in party dynamics, and the discovery of an accidental exploit certainly didn't help things much either. HP washing. This is a mechanic originally discovered by one of the game's former best players, Tiger. It's a method made in order to increase your max HP to levels beyond what the game originally intended. This way, any class could reasonably tank any boss. What I'm about to explain is going to be a bit hard to follow, so stay with me. To do this, you'd need to acquire AP reset scrolls, which, by the way, are only available in the cash shop. You put AP points into HP and use AP resets to take them out from MP and the rest into your stats. Thing is, the game has minimum MP caps, so you'll eventually reach a stopping point. That is where int gear comes in. Every time you level up, you'll gain an extra 1 MP for every 10 int. If you have an extra int, you'll also gain more MP when you put an AP point into said stat. So equip your int gear, use an AP reset on your main stat, put a point into MP, reset MP, and put into HP, and use another to put another point out of MP and into your main stat. By rinse and repeating this step, you can have at least 10,000 in base health. So yes, you can see how ridiculous this is. Despite that, Nexon never really bothered to patch this out nor felt the need to address it. Modern Maplestory's change to its formula has ridden this method, but its legacy will be forever remembered. Anyways, HP washing wasn't completely necessary in every class, but bosses could one-shot you if you weren't prepared. Maplestory bossing is not a short time sink. It could take upward from 30 minutes minimum to even an hour, and if you fuck up your rotations and pots even once, it could spell the end. Not to mention, you were limited in how many times you could go bossing per week, so of course players would feel compelled to HP wash in order to actually play a vital part of the game. Between paying for AP resets, marriage quests, and the excessive grinding, it's no wonder people could easily get burnt out. All the while, the game was awfully stagnant for quite some time amidst the hacking and botting that was going on. You can see how the game's population would start to inevitably tank and never recover. GMS in its current state usually averages about 6,000 players or so according to Steam, and that's just Steam. The majority of its population plays what is known as heroic or formerly freeboot servers. These servers are much more free-to-play friendly, lacking any trade and making it much easier to grind for mesos, stats, and levels. Playing the game on a regular server may as well be a pipe dream. Those players exist but far and few in between. Korean Maplestory, however, far exceeds the player count for regular servers alone. But despite that, the game suffers from continual fuck-up after fuck-up, no thanks to Nexon. Nexon of America is much worse at consumer relations with an absolute zero care in customer service. I keep up with the game from time to time since my younger brother plays it every day. Global Maplestory seems to be getting a bit better, but there's still a lot to be done if they want more players back. The level cap went from 200 to 300, and there's so much players need to do just to reach endgame content. It got so bad that the game continually offers hyper-burning events where players can turbo level from 1 to 260 real quick so they can do 6 jobs. Yes, there's now a 6th job, and it's at level 260. From everything I've talked about, it's clear that the gap between casual to endgame only widens more and more. But despite all the problems the game suffered, the community has remained strong. People still love the game even in its modern iteration, and those who miss the old days usually stick with private servers, which, legally, I will not endorse doing. Legally, alright? Yeah. Either way, it's technically no different from doing gacha daily. dailies. Well, sort of. Still, if you're interested in the game, I'll provide several links below to get your feet wet. And if you don't like it, just remember that the game is far less intensive on your computer than Genshin Impact. At the end of the day, no matter what happens to the game, the memories made will never die. Even now, Maplestory remains a core part of my childhood and even into my current life. It helped influence a lot of my love towards RPGs and game design in general. The story has become so much more fleshed out that the title is now much more accurate. I hope this video has allowed you to understand the appeal and impact that this game once had, and even if it no longer has a huge player count, there's still a love that will never die out. You can snuff out a fire, but passion is forever. Thank you everyone, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Peace.